Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In case you're new here, my name is Tyson and I am a PhD candidate in chemistry at Yale and Berkeley. On this channel, what we like to do is, share a little bit of academic insight, but we're young professionals, we like to have a good time. So we like to do this in as laid back a manner as possible, kind of similarly to the lunch table. So if that sounds interesting to you, definitely make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can keep rocking with us. All right. Now, today, we have a very, very special guest. A very close friend of mine, Dr. Hannah Lant, is here to talk to us a little bit about the process of finding and securing instruction-based careers for STEM PhDs. And so, Dr. Hannah, the newly Dean, Dr. Hannah, welcome to Fresh Professor.
Thanks.
All right, so you guys know the deal. We're going to go ahead and get started with introductions, but if you want to jump right into the content, I'll make sure to put timestamps in the description below. All right.
Yeah. So as you said, I've been doctor like 3 weeks. That sounds super strange to me. I just finished up my PhD at Yale in inorganic chemistry. And then also I've worked with Tyson for 3 years, I think?
Right.
At Yale's Teaching Center. And we've been working as fellows for graduate and postdoc teaching development. And one of the things that Tyson and I worked together with was the fundamentals of teaching chemistry for incoming graduate students who are teaching chemistry in the Yale department.
Yeah. And so I took fundamentals of teaching chemistry with Hannah my first year. So she taught me, and then we had the pleasure of teaching it together a few years after that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I learned a lot of what I know from Hannah Lant right here. So you guys are getting some quality information.
Yep.
So actually, can you walk us very quickly a little bit through your academic trajectory from maybe from college to where you are now?
Yeah. So I did my undergrad degree in chemistry at a small liberal arts college called Grinnell College. It's in central Iowa. Then I came to Yale to start my PhD in inorganic chemistry. And I did my PhD in artificial photosynthesis and kind of solar fuels. So It's developing catalysts for small molecule activation. So for me, teaching and research in kind of the scientific enterprise have always been very intimately tied. And I know we have this in common. So because I went to a primarily undergraduate institution, we didn't have graduate students around to do TAing. And so that was a job that you could do as an undergraduate, as like a senior, an upperclassman undergraduate. So I got started with, I think I did 1 semester working as we call them mentors, but it's essentially like a teaching assistant.
Okay.
So I did that for 1 semester in Gen Chem and then did, I think, 4 semesters in organic chemistry. And that was totally like the highlight, I would say, of my college career. I just loved that so much. And I think it was part of the reason that I wanted to go to graduate school and get a PhD that would enable me to do more teaching of chemistry. Yale also has a tradition of supporting, I would say, teaching at the graduate level, perhaps more so than other schools that I was looking at. I guess at the end of my first year, I applied to be a fellow at our teaching center. Of course, the position that both you and I have had. I kind of stumbled into it a little bit. I didn't know that much about it.
Sure.
I know I like teaching. I'm going to just apply for this.
Right.
And then I just found other ways to work in teaching to my graduate career. And I would say that I made that a very large focus. In addition to research, teaching and teaching development were featured very large in my graduate career.
Oh, very nice. So there you go. Just a little bit of insight for any of you interested in being the next Dr. Hannah Lant. So actually, the first thing that I want to ask you is about this chemistry preceptor, right? So is that?
Yeah, that's my job title.
That is your job title. And so can you share a little bit about what that title is and what that encompasses because I imagine that this is new to a lot of people.
Yeah, so preceptor, other than sounding like I work at Hogwarts or something, it's a new role that Yale created about 3 years ago. I think Harvard has them, but I don't think it's a very widespread thing other than those 2 institutions and maybe a couple that I'm unaware of.
Okay.
It's sort of a role where I'm working in the Gen Chem environment, I would say. So I'm affiliated both with the Gen Chem lecture as well as the Gen Chem lab. I'm not the primary lecturer in either, but I sort of bridge that and work with students in both capacities. So I'll be doing some of the lecturing in the Gen Chem lecture course. I'll be teaching 2 discussion sections. I run a website. I have like additional resources. I'm working also in like kind of a support capacity, which is especially important this year as students, can't really learn from their peers and things like that in the same way in past years. And then for the Gen Chem lab portion, I'll be doing some of those pre-lab lectures. I'll be teaching 2 lab sections. And then I'll just generally be working with all of the graduate TAs who are working either in the Gen Chem lecture or the Gen Chem lab.
What are the things on your application on your CV that you think really spoke to them?
Absolutely. Yeah. As I've mentioned, I worked as a fellow at our teaching center. So I was a fellow working with graduate and postdoc teaching development. And then I also, at one point, I guess last year, my final year of my graduate career, I applied to be an enrichment section TF. So that was a special section that they had developed it was kind of intended to ameliorate an achievement gap for students with kind of under-resourced backgrounds. Maybe they haven't taken the like AP Chem classes that some other students have taken. Maybe they haven't had a whole lot of quantitative stuff in their high school experience at all. So I kind of volunteered to have that section.
This was through the chemistry department or through?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it was actually jointly funded.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So I volunteered to work in that capacity. I did that for one semester, and that was a year ago fall. So that was for the Intro Gen Chem first semester course.
Right.
So I would say that doing those two things, working as that enrichment fellow and then working as a fellow. And then also I worked as a fellow at the Pourvu Center for 3 years. The fourth year, then I coordinated the team. I would say those are the two things that when I was applying to positions, and especially as I was talking about my work, I kept coming back to those things. But I will say both of those things I came into because I thought they seemed really cool and I was really interested to do them. So that is the one thing that I've learned along the way too, is that the things that I was most motivated to do just kind of intrinsically ultimately turned out to be the ones that shaped my path. And I don't think that that's a coincidence.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. 'Cause I think like grad school, is so much of like finding, I guess, like your passion in a sense, and like you're already in grad school, so to some degree this is your passion. But I think that everyone comes into grad school with a similar career, which is like, I think that most people come in and they want to be a faculty. But I think that once they get in there, they realize, what aspects of research or teaching or mentorship really do I enjoy the most? And that kind of, so that's interesting.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things that I was thinking about when I was applying was the things that were important to me, kind of people I wanted to work with, and kind of my personal expertise.
Sure.
Mostly relating to STEM stuff.
Okay.
So I think, when I was looking at positions, I was thinking I want to work primarily with people in the sciences, but not solely. One of the things I really value about teaching development work and our experience as teaching fellows was being able to interact with humanists and things like that. You don't normally get to do when you're siloed away in your research lab.
Right. So. Yeah, I mean, the teaching center really was the primary venue through which I interacted with non-scientists. So like you said, humanists or even social scientists in grad school. Yeah, so that's a good point.
Totally. And that was awesome. So I really wanted that aspect to exist in my future career. But at the same time, I feel the most like I have the most expertise talking about STEM teaching. And I love STEM teaching. I love actually being in the classroom and teaching science.
Right.
Which is what I'm doing in my current role. So that was another thing I was looking at. Some positions allow you to teach like one course a year. Okay. And so that was a perk that I was seeing in some of these descriptions that I really like. It's hard to do teaching development work, as you might know, in years that you worked as a fellow when you weren't actually in the classroom.
Right.
To talk about teaching when you're not actively teaching.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is, so I taught for my first year of graduate school, and then I did the teaching center for basically 2.5 years, right? Because I left, and so it was really 2 years, but then I did fundamentals of teaching chemistry, so it felt like 2.5. And I've not been back to teach in the classroom since, and so it's like I've learned all these fantastic things, but I've not had the opportunity to really implement them, I guess, other than through Fresh Professor, but actually in the classroom. Yeah, so like you're saying, it's a very interesting thing because you're teaching, but then it's also nice to be teaching actually in the classroom. Yeah,
one of the things that I talk about with people when I do observations, particularly if I've done observations of someone who's teaching somewhere in the sciences, is emphasizing that the same kind of like scientific way that you can think about research and experimentation in research, you should be doing in the classroom and in your teaching as well. There's no such thing as like hitting on the perfect formula for how you're going to set up your classroom or whatever. So you should always be in this research mode.
Exactly.
And I think that's something that you kind of crystallized for me too. I remember one year with fundamentals, you wanted to have this theme that was like teach like a scholar, I think it was.
Right. Yeah.
And that's something I've really internalized for myself too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Teaching as research in general, like, which I think is what you're kind of getting at, like in the, no, it's really important. And I also thought that it was something that was very effective with the incoming classes, like, because we teach incoming first year chemistry PhD students. And I know that I was there, like, you know, when I first walked into fundamentals, like I thought I knew everything already. I taught in undergrad. And so like, yeah, I just really thought that spin in general, like where it's like, okay, yeah, you've taught before, but you may not have taught in this way, you know, like as a part of scholarship. So, and,
totally.
But yeah, it's an important thing to emphasize. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a secret, right, that that academia kind of privileges research sometimes over teaching.
Sure.
And so I think it can be important to think about it that way and talk about teaching that way. It's also something, again, coming back to what we were just saying about, you know, who I wanted to work with in my job too.
Right.
It's admittedly, I think a lot of people will say, a challenge working in teaching development and working primarily with faculty,
right,
because faculty do have the privilege that they place on kind of research over teaching. So,
right.
However, I will say the pandemic, I think, has been kind of this reckoning for universities and teaching. And so, for example, like just the fact that I was hired in this teaching role at all, meanwhile, they have a hiring freeze for any kind of research professors.
Right.
Tells you something about all of a sudden shifting priorities.
Sure.
And I think I'm just seeing in getting started with this role as preceptor, all the ways that we're leaning on the Poorvu Center to kind of help us out with all sorts of now teaching in a totally different environment where we're only online.
That's true.
All of a sudden, the value of teaching and teaching development has really changed.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. I didn't really think about that, but the distinction between lecturing, like, you know, so many people or so many professors, or just like even TAs and stuff, who really think that they are really good at teaching just through lecturing.
Right.
And so the distinction between lecturing and teaching is probably more so evident than ever before, because you have to really ensure that you're engaging your students and make sure that they're learning. And it's just interesting. It's a big task that you have right now as the chemistry preceptor during this time, but I'm sure that you're the right person for the job.
Thanks.
And so tell us, so obviously it's kind of a funny question because you're now starting, you just finished your PhD, but I'm curious, like, what long-term this looks like, and I'm sure other people will be curious.
Yeah.
So like where do you see yourself?
Yeah, so the preceptorship is like a kind of a year by year type thing.
Okay.
The maximum I can hold this position is 3 years.
Okay.
Right now, if I was just guessing, I think I'll probably end up having it for 2.
Okay.
Of course, that means they need to invite me back next year. Hopefully they will.
Sure.
After that, we'll see. So like I said, in November of last year, I was primarily looking at teaching development work, but already I'm being reminded how much I love just teaching chemistry in the classroom.
Sure.
So, I think future job searches will kind of span the gamut between teaching development and instruction. And then, of course, to be frank, also, just like how secure the position is, what are the benefits, et cetera, is another concern as well. So, I mean, a lot of teaching work through like an adjunct type position, which is unfortunate that universities are falling more and more back on that kind of thing, just because that doesn't give you a very secure kind of standard of living.
Sure.
So, whereas I think a lot of teaching development work tends to be kind of more full-time salaried work.
Right.
So there's some security in that as well.
Sure. What about like a lectureship kind of?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely on the table for me. If I think that kind of seems like the most ideal at the very current moment.
Right.
We'll see how that shifts over the next year.
Yeah.
But, so I think that would be, my dream job. But I really like the way that this job I have right now is working both with lecture and in the lab. Sure. And I'm really hoping that if I do continue to teach in chemistry, that I can bridge that. I wouldn't just be lecturing.
Sure.
In chemistry, for example. And what you're saying about lecturing and active learning, and obviously I'm a big proponent of active learning. And I think in general, chemistry in general, just like the way almost, globally we think about what a general chemistry curriculum looks like and how that interfaces with lab could really be changed up a lot. I think labs in general could really reinforce the material that you learn in lecture and vice versa. They tend to be really divorced as of right now.
Sure.
Just as an anecdote, one time I had a student ask me how my titrations were going.
Okay. In lab?
Yeah.
No.
Like in my own research.
Right.
How are your titrations going? Which I really appreciated as she was just trying to connect with me and ask me about my life. But I was just like, it was like a facepalm moment, right? You're like, oh, So they think that this is
People
what
actually do.
chemistry research looks like.
Yeah. And there's so many titrations in Gen Chem lab.
Exactly, right.
Yeah,
it's a useful thing to think about stoichiometry
Right.
a couple of times. And after that, it's just like physically, like, you know, let's give you some carpal tunnel while you're at it.
Right, yeah. No, sure. And so something, kind of one of the final things I want to ask you, I forgot to focus on it before, but you started to mention it. So for most of these jobs, did you mention that you started applying in fall of 2019? So basically about a year ahead is when people should expect to start putting in those applications.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. So what kind of kicked off my application process? And I'm going to be honest that having that conversation with your advisor about, is it time for me to graduate or not?
Right.
Can be hard, especially if your graduate advisor doesn't initiate it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's hard to like walk into someone's office and be like, I think I'm ready to have my PhD.
Right, yeah.
So like for me, I had kind of two different versions of my CV. One was the teaching development focused CV, and one was the science instruction focused CV.
So tell us a little bit about the distinction. So what did you highlight in one versus the other?
Yeah, so I mean, pretty much it was like the same content, but you know, just sort of rearranged. So like a teaching development CV would have all the teaching development work at the top. So of course, at the very top, you know, it says PhD in inorganic chemistry expected summer 2020 or whatever. But then under that, it gave my sort of tenure as a fellow and like when I did the coordinator role as well, and those dates, all the responsibilities of the coordinator. Some advice I got from the people that I worked with at the teaching center was kind of like, you can brand the coordinator role as closely to that assistant director level as possible, and a lot of the responsibilities are similar. All the responsibilities that we mentioned earlier that fellows do, like that really does actually span the gamut of the kind of work that teaching development people do. So if you have a diversity of experiences, you know, if you've done some observation, if you've done some workshops, trying to outline that as explicitly as possible is useful.
But then your typical scientific background is still on the teaching development CV. So
Right. Yeah, and I mean, certainly if you're working in teaching development, you need to demonstrate that you've done plenty of teaching. So of course that was still on there too. It was just the second part, I guess.
Sure. Okay. And then so basically, and it's just flipped, you said, for your instruction based.
Right. Yeah. So in both of these cases then for the instruction based ones, my teaching experience is first, and I more clearly list what are the responsibilities involved there. And then the teaching development work is still on there, but it's lower down, and it's maybe less, you know, detailed description of exactly what that entails, especially when it was in the resume format where it needs to be more brief.
Right. But what about like the presentations, publications, awards? Like where
does that all go?
Those things go on there? And where in this setup would you say you would have put those things, or you did put those things, I guess?
Right. So all of that stuff would still go on there. It would be even lower down.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So, and then in some cases, I even just had like selected publications rather than my entire publication history, especially in the resume format rather than the CV format.
Right. Okay. It's interesting.
Yeah. So it's really all the same content. It's just like what you choose to highlight and how explicit you are with the very like minute details of your responsibilities in those positions.
No, but I mean, but it's something good to bring up. I'm glad you pointed it out, because I think that most people, you know, obviously with the STEM CV, like you put your publications and things like that kind of first, like and so
Also, if you want, I'm happy to post those two examples if you want, in your description or whatever.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I'll definitely put those below. You guys can check that out. I appreciate you doing that. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
Great. All right, and so, you know, I think that we've taken a fair bit of your time at this point. But I will ask before you close if you have any final remarks that you want to share with the audience.
Yeah, sure. I guess I would say now, having just ended my PhD about 3 weeks ago, is that I think I did a good job during my graduate career of like making it the experience I wanted it to be. I pushed hard to get the teaching experience that I wanted, the teaching development work that I wanted. I don't think my advisor was always happy with it all the time.
Okay, right.
But that's what I wanted out of graduate school. Sure. At times I kind of felt guilty during graduate school, and now on the other side, I've seen that it's led me to the career that I want to have. Right. So whether it's teaching, I know some people who are interested in like entrepreneurship or business, Like you can get those experiences in graduate school. Your PI wants you to get a job. You just have to you have to package it that way sometimes. And you have to advocate for yourself. I guess if you're at the level of, choosing a graduate PI, knowing whether or not that they will accommodate that kind of thing, some professional development is really useful.
Yeah, actually, very quickly, if you don't mind me interrupting, on that note, we have had one of my buddies, Gad, come on to talk about a website that he developed called Grad PI, which is designed to do exactly that. So definitely feel free to check out that video. I'll put it in the description and also put a card here as well. But it's super important because, actually, so in the off chance that my advisor sees this video, this would be the first time that she'll find out that I worked at the teaching center. She actually never knew about it. But she's very nice. I don't know. I assume she wouldn't mind, but I just never brought it up. I just made sure that I was able to fulfill research requirements fully enough where it didn't matter, right? Such that she would never even know that there was something else that I was spending time on because I was still able to, generate enough results to,
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Totally.
Cool. Well, Dr. Hannah Lant, thank you again for coming out to chat with us and tell us all about your new position and chemistry preceptor, and again about the teaching fellow, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of great content here. So I appreciate you sharing.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you.
So if people did want to reach out to you, what would be a good way to do so?
Just probably by email. So you can put my Yale email in the description. And then also I'll put my Gmail as well in case, I move on from the preceptor role and from Yale in the next year or so.
Right.
And I'm very happy to answer all kinds of questions about, teaching in STEM, teaching development, looking for these kinds of jobs.
Great. So that'll definitely be in the description below. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Definitely make sure that you guys drop a like to thank Hannah for coming out to chat with us and share some insight. If you have any questions for either of us, definitely reach out to Hannah. Feel free to drop a comment as well. And thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, that's it.